There's a province in western China where people are afraid to speak. It's called Xinjiang. Coming here would change my life. Xinjiang is mostly desert with a number of high mountain ranges that surround it. The Chinese, for many years, it's been their Siberia. It's where they built a lot of their penal colonies. And it's a site of Lopnor, which is the only nuclear testing site in China. Xinjiang is also where they have the country's largest oil reserves. Xinjiang is also the homeland of 8 million Sufi Muslims. They are known as the Uyghurs, and they call this place East Turkestan. I came here to see what life is like for these Muslims in China. They speak a different language. They look very different from the Han Chinese, and most of them live in the far northwest of China in the Xinjiang province. They practice Islam, but it's a more relaxed form. The men typically, they drink, and the women do not cover up very much. But now the borders are open with Pakistan. To some degree, the Chinese do fear ideas will percolate in, and they may join sort of this global movement towards militant Islam. China took control of this region 50 years ago, flooding the area with immigrants from the overcrowded East. Chinese control gave rise to serious ethnic tensions. In this video, which was smuggled out of China, Uyghurs stormed a government building in 1995. There have been a series of riots like this. In response, Chinese police have cracked down, arresting Uyghur dissidents. The Chinese have called them Islamic terrorists. China has a long list of what they call terrorist organizations or splittist organizations that are Uyghur-based. There were about 20 Uyghurs caught in Afghanistan fighting alongside the Taliban. They have been held in Guantanamo for years, and recently Secretary of State Powell announced that they would not be repatriated to China for fear that they would be executed upon arrival. Independent reporting is forbidden in this part of China, so I decided to come as a tourist, undercover. We hired a Chinese driver to take us around.
Let's go!
Let's go!
Our driver was Han Chinese, the majority ethnic group in China. He was part of the wave of immigrants sent to the region to develop it.
现在不错，还可以，挺好的。
He'd come there with the military and lived there for 9 years. He wasn't pleased about being stationed in Xinjiang, but eventually he got used to it.
我们不知道是要到这个地方来。一般他这个地方的条件比较艰苦，他不跟你说，他说了怕你不来。等到了才知道到了新疆。到了以后我们下飞机，飞机场不是荒凉的很嘛？大冬天的12月份有雪，那个风吹着哗哗哗的，人感觉到心里面特别的冷清，特别不舒服。
He took us to a lake on the Pakistan-Chinese border. He was pretty open about how he felt about Muslims.
猪是维族人的祖先。对，猪是维族人的祖先，所以他们不吃猪肉。
喜欢结婚汉族是还是维吾尔？
我肯定要找一个汉族的呀，找维族的话生活习惯不同。他们不吃大肉，我们要吃大肉。要找一个汉族的。 He kind of symbolized a lot of attitudes that the Chinese people have there. Hello! How are you? We were thinking if we went in as two pretty low-profile people, just went to the usual tourist spots, carried a very small camera, that we would be okay. The next day, we hired a Uyghur guide. We hoped he would give us a little more of the other side of the story. He took us around Kashgar, the traditional center of Uyghur culture and religion, and one of the oldest cities in Xinjiang.
Guess what is this for, Serene?
Smoking.
Smoking? No, you're wrong. You have 2 more chances.
With a candle, you snuff this.
No, wrong. Okay, listen.
A clue.
This is actually the things for Uyghur babies peeing. Okay, sounds funny, huh? It is. We have been using this for 1,000 years. And this for boys, and this for girls. The boys' little things goes in here. Boys, girls.
When the camera was rolling, he wouldn't say anything very interesting, but when the camera wasn't rolling, he would mention a few things that, for example, he said he really couldn't discuss politics. He mentioned that he'd been trying to leave the area for 7 years, trying to get a passport, but it was difficult for a Muslim man to do that. It seemed like he wanted to talk with us, but couldn't. The people tend to be fairly segregated. Each town there's a Uyghur section and there's a Chinese section. The Chinese section tends to be more modern, a lot of bigger buildings, skyscrapers, and the office buildings. And the Uyghurs tend to be more agricultural. There's stalls where they sell food and smaller markets and smaller goods. They tend to be very poor.
It's hard to see as a tourist, but human rights organizations say harsh tactics are used to keep the Uyghurs under control. Spying is widespread. Arrest, imprisonment, and even executions are common here. Still, Uyghurs tried to communicate with us in small ways.
There was one incident in Gulja. We had gone to a bazaar, and we were looking at the wares of this guy who was selling trinkets. We told him we were American, and as soon as we told him that, he pulled out a pamphlet, and he said, "Look here, there's this, American woman in this picture." But I think what he was really trying to show us was next to her was a picture of Rabia Kadir, a very famous Uyghur businesswoman who was imprisoned for 8 years for giving some newspapers to an American delegation. What he really wanted to say was, Rabia Kadir, look at her and remember that incident. And we asked him if we could film it, and he said, no.
There was one interview we had set up in advance. He was a Uyghur man who had agreed to meet us. He came to our hotel room late one night in the city of Gulja.
When he met us, we just thought he was absolutely unforgettable. He was very articulate, and at the same time, he was terrified to come, just to come to our hotel to see us. He was terrified. He sat in our hotel room trembling for, close to an hour and refused to be videotaped. And here was sitting in our hotel room kind of the embodiment of the fear and so the results of this policy that China's had with the Uyghurs these last 50 years. I felt that in order to tell the story, someone like that had to be shown. In the United States, there are some Uyghurs who are willing to speak out. Some of them also tend to be afraid. They have families back home. One of the Uyghurs that we interviewed has lived in the States for 6-7 years. His mother and his sister still live in China. He simply decided that if he doesn't speak out, who's gonna speak out?
Hello.
This is Salim.
Nice to meet you.
Come on in. This is my house.
In China, we are considered as a minority. In China, the word minority or 少数民族, it automatically means second-class citizen. It means you're backward, you're dirty, you're superstitious, you have no education, you are lazy, all kinds of labels on you, on us. My father was one of the victims of the Chinese regime. He was a pro-independence person. He had this deep belief that Uyghur people deserved an independent state. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He was in prison from 1970 till 1980.
By the time his father got out of prison, Alam was 11 and didn't recognize him.
I went home and I saw one gray-haired, long-bearded, skinny older man. We were all crying.
Today, Alam and his brother live in the United States under political asylum.
We speak a different language. We believe in a different religion. Our cultures, traditions, all different. Today, China conquered us, occupied us, and treat us like slaves, dogs, whatever, not as human beings. Without respecting our human rights, race, friend, everything, just force us to live according to Chinese culture and Chinese standard. There is no way we can accept that, and we will not accept that. I don't think we have ever accepted that. And that's why, as feeble as we are, we're still struggling against Chinese rule.
While I was back in the United States, I received an email from the Uyghur man who had been too frightened to talk to us earlier. He said the situation was getting worse, and he had decided to talk. At the end of October, I flew back to China and went to the capital in Urumqi and met him.
It was a very short interview, about 15-20 minutes, because he was still very frightened. He said that if the government knew that he had come to talk with me, he would be punished very severely. He talked a bit about the fact that Uyghurs, they just can't express themselves. He didn't talk about separatism. He simply said they wanted to be able to speak freely. I asked him if he knew if there were terrorists, and he said he didn't know of any. He wasn't aware of any. It's just mostly people are discontented with the way they're treated and the difficulty of trying to eke out a life as a Uyghur man in that part of the country. He brought with him a list that he wrote of about 20 names and ages of Uyghurs, he said, that he'd read in the newspaper had been either imprisoned or executed. That list later became a big problem for him.
We finished the interview at sunset and left the hotel.
As soon as we got out the front door, I noticed out of the corner of my eye these two men dressed in plain dark clothing walking towards us. They grabbed his arm, they grabbed my arm, they showed us some identification and told us they were police and we needed to go back upstairs to his room with them. They had him take off his jacket, empty out his pockets, and they told him to stand against the wall. He was so frightened, he fell to his knees and he passed out. After a while, they took him to another room, and when they brought him back, he was crying. And the rest of the time that I was with him, he was just crying with his head in his hands. They asked me again and again and again what was my motivation. Why was I so interested in terrorists? Why was I so interested in terrorism? Why did I want to talk with terrorists? Again and again, just conflating the words terrorist, Uyghur, separatist. In their minds, it was all one thing. When they were questioning me, I never felt like they were concerned about finding out what the truth was. I felt it was about punishment. Punishment for this man coming to see me, punishment for me for coming to China to talk about Uyghurs. I only had one tape, and they took it. I'm assuming it's now evidence against him. Past history of China's treatment of Uyghurs who've been in their custody has been very severe. Experts in China, human rights advocates have said, if he gets 3 to 5 years in prison, you should just be happy for him and just not say anything.
But since that night, I haven't been able to obtain any information about him. That's why I decided to reveal his identity, to bring attention to his situation. His name is Dilkesh Tilavaldi. He worked for the city of Gulja. He was taken away on the night of October 19th by the Ministry of State Security.
Subscribe to those journalistic ethics that say that the story is important. It's important to get the truth out there, but, you know, the price was very high and I didn't have to pay it. So, yeah, if I could take it back, I would. I think about his wife and his children. You know, what are they going to do? So yeah, I regret it. The last image I have of him is they're kind of pushing him out the door, and he sort of stumbled on his way out the door of his hotel room, and that's it.